Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Emily. So I have a few questions, but I want to open it up to anybody else to ask questions first. Does anybody want to? And you can throw it in the chat if you'd like. Larry, go ahead.
I have a dozen questions. First, the Yorktown schools don't own their own buses. They contract with a large bus company called Total. I saw in your brochures that a three-party thing is possible. So how would that work? And what would the bus company and the school district have to agree to in addition to submitting the EPA application on August 19th?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in two parts, and then Emily, feel free to chime in if you want to add anything. So I think in the start of Highland, I think we were a little less flexible. I think I mentioned this before. So we preferred that during the lifetime of a contract, we own the bus, and the school district would get that bus after the end of our partnership. I think as we've gotten older, it allows us to be more flexible, and so we can work with the school district whether they lease or own their vehicle. So if they own their vehicle, they're purchasing their vehicle, they own it outright. If they're leasing their vehicle, they're working with like what you're mentioning, which is a dealer.
No,
A third-party fleet provider.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So we can work with that. We can work with a dealer, we can work with a lease, and we can work with a school district if they're working with a third-party fleet provider. If you're talking about the EPA specifically, the third-party fleet provider can apply with the school district in partnership with the school district.
Yeah, and just to add there, so one of our projects, I believe we're contracted with the third-party fleet provider to provide electric buses to the school district, and then that third-party fleet provider provides the drivers. So as Claire mentioned, there's a possibility for us to work with both third-party fleet providers and the school district directly, where there's a lot of different ways to do it, and it kind of depends on how the school district and the third-party fleet provider is contracted currently, but we're flexible in accommodating those types of situations.
So
yeah, and sorry, Larry. I was just going to add on there. I think that's important because a lot of times the school district will have a pretty tight relationship with their third-party fleet manager, and think that by working with us, they would have to disrupt that in some way. But I think it's really important that we can be that flexible, because I think the least that we can disrupt the normal process that a school district is going through, the better suited we are to help them electrify and not get as much pushback. So,
but again, what would it says that we would have there would be three parties on our EPA application. What is the school district and what is the bus company promising to do to get the two buses? I'm going to make the assumption that since Yorktown is not a priority district, that they're in the lottery. There's not a lot of money if you divide by 50 states and so forth. So I'm going to assume that that Yorktown is not going to win the lottery. So what would Yorktown sign? Is that available? What would the bus company sign to get that promotional two buses?
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. So the school district would talk with us and they would list us as a partner on their application. There's a specific spot in the application, and I'm blanking on it now, that they would insert Highland and our information, our address, that sort of thing. If they were to apply to the EPA with us on the application, then that would get them the 2-bus guarantee, because like you said, they're likely probably not going to get rewarded or awarded during this first round, but that's the only thing that they need to do to get that guarantee through us.
Right, but what would the school district have to agree to? I understand we fill out a joint application.
Right.
What is the obligation? Is it the contract with Total goes 2 more years of a 5-year contract? So what else does the school district, what else does Total have to sign?
Yeah, so in addition to that joint application, really what that does is just signal to us that they're potentially interested with working like with Highland. So if they are or they aren't awarded that money, it sounds like Yorktown probably will not be awarded this money. It doesn't tie them down to working with Highland. It just ensures that they would get that 2-bus guarantee. But there's really not much of an obligation in that first step, that application step. I think a lot of that obligation would come in conversations after this first round is awarded. But I don't know, Emily, if you want to jump in there at all.
Yeah, I get your question, Larry. I think we'd need to look a little bit more about, into the relationship between Yorktown and their Total, which is their fleet provider, and see where their contract stands right now. If they still have 5 years on their contract and we can adjust it, that's a consideration. So we need a little bit more kind of figuring out how that would work to kind of give you a more complete answer, I think.
Okay, so there's 2 years left on the contract.
Okay.
It's a short period of time. Claire, I didn't understand what you said in the New York bill, 12 years now for a contract. You're saying the next time the Yorktown goes out to bid for a contract, they can bid a 12-year contract?
Yep, they can bid up to 12 years, so they don't have to, but they are legally allowed now to bid up to 12 years.
Well, a 12-year lease, right?
A 12-year lease, yeah.
So that doesn't affect a 5-year contract. Or if you don't know,
It wouldn't affect any contract that's currently, like if you're 3 years into a 5-year contract with 2 years left, I don't think it would change that.
I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think maybe the confusion is about what contract you're talking about and leasing the buses. The law, New York State, and stop me if I've got this wrong, but New York State law was that school districts could only lease buses for up to 5 years. And now the law has been changed, which is not good for electric school bus funding because they're so much more expensive. They take longer. It's a longer payback period. But they changed the law with e-school buses in mind to up to 12 years now. So that's, within the window that Fleet likes, and it would be definitely good for, funding, passing a bond in a school district, for example, to fund the purchase of an electric school bus. Does that, am I?
Yeah, no, that's
Correct.
totally right. And I also think that you make another good point there, which is that it is specifically for electric school buses. Regular buses are still on that 5-term lease law. Electric school buses get an exemption to that lease term and get the extension out to 12 years because of like what Joe said, it takes longer to recognize the savings on an electric school bus. And so that's why they're extended only for electric school buses.
Okay, and when there's funding available, so on May 27th, NYSERDA sent out a notice saying that the non-Volkswagen money was used up. And so only buses that went through disadvantaged communities is the way they the way they worded it, would be available for the incentives.
Mhm.
So does the Highland model depend on the state or federal incentives, or does it not? And if they come, the bond is for 500 million in New York State. So if there's 200,000 per school bus to bring them on par with a diesel, no more than a diesel, that's 2,500 buses. So again, it's not like it's anywhere near a large amount of the buses. So hopefully districts that were a district like Yorktown would pay attention and be one of the ones applying. So
Yeah.
is the Highland model dependent upon the state and federal incentives or not?
Yeah, so no, we're not. I think it's a sweetener, and like I said, we stack a bunch of different value streams, right? Grants and rebates is just one of those that we stack. So it makes it easier for us, especially when we're doing that financial modeling. If there are grants or rebates that we can wrap in, but we're not dependent on it. I think you also brought up a good thing, which is that the New York voucher program they are through all their DARA funding right now. And so what they have left is some Volkswagen settlement funding. And I believe I was emailing with them last week, and I believe they have between, it's like 1.5 and $2 million of funding left. That's actually not that many buses. So they're hoping to get through that money, and then the money that we see in this bond will be through NYSERDA, but will not be implemented in the same way that the voucher program money was implemented. And I think that you're right that it doesn't cover 100% of the cost of a bus. But putting my policy wonk hat on, it's actually good that it's not funding 100% of the bus, because sometimes that can have a reverse effect where dealers in the state, because they know that the state will pay 100% of the bus, will actually increase their prices. And so by funding a portion of that, a portion of the cost of a bus and not the whole bus, we actually incentivize the market as a whole to drive the prices down. So it's actually designed well, and I think it's also the perfect setup for a public-private partnership like Highland, right? Because you can take that public money, and then to fill in that gap, a company like Highland or our competitors can kind of fill in that gap with our private funding.
That's a great point, Claire. Larry, I know you have more questions, but I just want to give other people a chance to
Sorry,
jump.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Dwight, Janet, Mariah, do you have questions at the moment that haven't been answered yet?
Can you just clarify, Ron, who was on the meeting originally, what his position is? Is he another go-between? Was he facilitating this today?
Yeah, so Ron is actually he's our consultant for Highland. So he just kind of helps us get in touch with school districts and have this conversation, a lot like the one that we're having. Not a sales conversation, but the conversation that I have with a lot of folks, which is just electric school bus education. Because I think, like I mentioned before, I'm part of the market dev team. So my whole goal is electric school bus education. And so that's what Ron helps me do, is just get calls like this set up so that I can just educate people on electric school buses.
Yeah, I guess it was a coincidence that, just as I was saying, I wanted to get, Emily had contacted me, told me about Fleet. I contacted, other advocates that I know of in Northern Westchester and Putnam. And then Ron contacted me, apparently out of the blue, and said, "Hey, Joe, would you be interested in hearing about, a way for school districts to blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Yeah, actually, I was going to be working on that. So yeah, you do it." And so
Okay, great. Yeah. So with further questions, we go to Emily or Claire? Or Joe?
Not
Yep.
me, no.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we can pass, Claire and I can provide Joe with our contact information, and then he can pass it along to you guys if that works.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'll go ahead and drop and Emily, if you want to, I'm just gonna drop my
Oh.
email in the chat.
Yeah, I'll just do that now.
But then also Joe can follow up with it and as well as the slide deck. But
Yeah,
yeah, Janet, feel free to reach out to me or Emily. Emily is joining us as a former student today, and her focus is out on the West, but I know that she's happy to answer questions that anyone may have. And then I am as well. So both of us can be a good resource.
Okay,
I
thank
have
you.
a quick question.
Okay.
go
Yep.
for it, Mariah.
Where does Highland make money in this process? Is it the vehicle to grid?
So
'Cause
it's
it
not.
almost sounds like too good to be true.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a response we get a lot.
Yeah, we do get that one a lot. Emily, do you want to explain this one?
Sure. So vehicle to grid, we don't rely on that to make money. It's not a service that's available in every place. We're the first company that's done it anywhere. And we've done it in Massachusetts. We basically make money on the efficiency of the bus over time. So a school district is paying a fixed annual subscription fee of, it could be anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 a year. It really depends on the scope of the project. So they're paying that fixed cost over time. And we rely on the maintenance and fuel savings over time for us to make money. Kind of a simple explanation.
Do you want to follow up, Mariah, or does that make sense?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that, I find so attractive about this, because obviously school districts are not going to want to lay out $300,000. I'm just making that number up, $300,000 for a school bus when they can buy one for $100,000 that's diesel. And even issuing a bond for 12 years for that amount of money is going to blow people's minds, especially in this economic climate right now. And yet New York State has said, we need to get moving on this, and you'll only be able to buy diesel buses for so much longer. So, and that's true with, electric vehicles too. It's a lot of money up front, but you're saving money over the life of the vehicle. It would be great if there was a program like that to help people buy electric vehicles as well. Rebates are helpful, but the sticker price is what scares people away, I think, from a lot of these, renewable energy technologies in general. So I love the idea of this model, and it's great to kind of dig in here and get more info. I just have one minor question. I think you mentioned e-revenue at one point, Claire, and I'm guessing that you were referring to the EV to grid program. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, probably I mentioned the V to G revenue. And so that is the vehicle to grid revenue. So yeah, and that's for just for like a high level is and I'm sure all of y'all know, but that's most attractive to school bus fleets and to electric school bus fleets during the summertime when they're not operating on a regular route. And then they're essentially a big rolling battery, so they can sell that that energy back onto the grid. It's not allowed everywhere. It depends on the energy market that the state is in. But if it is allowed, it's a really, really attractive option for school districts. It's kind of a no-brainer if it's allowed.
I think it's the future too, whether it's allowed in places or not. I mean, people talk to me about buying Tesla Powerwalls, and I'm like, well, if you buy an EV, you've basically got a Tesla Powerwall in your driveway,
Yeah.
and more EVs are now coming, designed to be used in that way.
Yeah.
The new.
I think the resiliency piece is really, I think it's a piece that people don't talk about as much, but I think it's a really attractive piece. And that's what you're talking about, right? That's what you're speaking to, I should say, is the resiliency aspect of these vehicles. And my favorite thing is from the winter storm in Texas is that there were all these articles that came out afterwards that folks with Teslas that were out of power in their home were using their Tesla to power various items in their home and for heat, and that sort of thing. And I feel like that just speaks, it speaks to electrification of light duty vehicles, but like imagine doing that with a battery as big as the one that's on an electric school bus.
I can imagine school buses being deployed as emergency power sources, in a community that's devastated by a storm.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's like a dispatchable energy resource or a distributed energy resource. And I think it's one of the ones that coming out of like the advanced energy space, we talk about distributed energy resources, or DERs, as we like to call them, quite a bit. And electric school buses and electric vehicles more generally are considered a DER, and they're the one that I find the most amusing to talk about because it's a lot easier for people to wrap their heads around how a battery could be used as a distributed energy resource in both cold weather situations and then also warm weather situations and hurricanes. The list kind of goes on. So I think it's a really it's a piece that I like to talk about, and I hope more people start talking about it as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and then we can get to Dwight's question, that we try to make the V2G types of programs happen everywhere, and the school district or the third-party fleet provider would not have to kind of manage that program. That's on Highland to manage those complexities, and then we're able to pass the revenue on to the school district. So that's just another benefit of Highland and what we try to share and talk about is that school districts don't have to deal with the complexities of those types of things when they're looking at these projects.
Dwight?
So two things. One is kind of a trivial thing, but I hear 2027 mentioned. When I looked at the write-ups of the legislative session, it appeared to me that the date's 2029. It seems as though 2027 is the deadline, and then if you miss the deadline, what they'll do is give you till 2029. So it seems
Yep.
like to me, everybody will plan on 2029 as being the actual deadline.
Yeah, so a lot of times there were a few mandates, electric school bus mandates that were put in place in a variety of states for this past legislative session. One of those is Maryland. It was the most ambitious one that we saw. But a lot of times those mandates in the legislative writing, like you're saying, in the fine writing, will have some sort of escape clause in them, as we would say. And usually those allow for an extension or an all-out exemption of the mandate. In Maryland, school districts are allowed to have an all-out exemption, actually. So this is a little less cushy, but also gives that extension. So I think though, Dwight, what you'll find is that a lot of school districts probably are not reading the fine line of the legislative text. And so I'm assuming some will, and either maintain beholden to that 2027 or at least operate like they are, even if they are going to seek out that extension, because ultimately that's 2 years, right? So it is an extension, and I'm sure that some will need to take it, especially the school districts that maybe are operating on a tighter budget, or maybe their time, their turnaround of their diesel fleet doesn't line up quite as well. But yeah, I think hopefully, I hope school districts will at least try to meet that 2027, knowing that they do have the flexibility to extend, but kind of keeping that as a motivator.
That would be rational.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. That's out of fashion. The other thing is I'm just a little intimidated by the question of how to start. Like I listened to Larry, who knows how many buses there are and what kind of terms they're acquired on and what's coming next. I don't know any of that stuff. I look at all the information available from my school district. They're not talking about any of that, except that once a year they'll put out a bond issue to buy another 7 buses or something. And that's the only information you get is if you save those up, I guess you could get a profile of what's going on. But so how do you start? How do you, like, I'm kind of picturing going to the office of one of my school board members and saying, hi, I'm a citizen and I'd like to know a lot of information. And they're going to like find a way to get me out the door as fast as they possibly can.
Yeah, and I'll let Emily mostly answer this, but I think, you know, all of these details, I know transportation directors usually can give you a lot of it from memory. They know their fleet really, really well. And as well as school business officials, they know the operating budgets of the transportation departments really, really well. So from our perspective, how we get started is having those conversations with the transportation directors and with the school board members, and then hoping that you know, in doing that, they're also being transparent with citizens and with community groups that are engaged, right? So, you know, I'm always a big fan of going and showing up at school board members' offices, because it it allows them to not have an easy way out. And I think it's important to have school board members on board. A lot of the projects that we see happen are in part due to having at least a majority of the school board members on board. The school board members and the business officials are a really critical piece to this. And I think what I tell folks is that you can have a school board that's really on board. You can have a transportation director that's really on board, but the sweet spot is when you have both of them that are not only on board, but really well educated, because that's how these projects are not only going to get done and start, you know, to take off, but be done really, really well. So, but Emily, I don't know if there's any other advice you would have for folks that want to get started.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add. I think we're also figuring it out too. On how to get districts really engaged in these types of projects. So yeah, definitely encourage you to go to your school board members and try to talk to them about it.
Yeah, you know, as a retired school teacher, I have dealt with, you know, indirectly, mostly with school boards, but I've dealt with superintendents and business managers. And I think it depends. I think the answer is it depends on the school district, you know. And in Mayapack, where Dwight and I live, I was just thinking about this today, Dwight, because there was an article in today's Mayapack News that Ben DeLulo was appointed as the president of the school board for this year. And he actually made contact with me regarding Sustainable Putnam. So I feel like I can reach out to him. We also have a new superintendent who I've already met in our school district. So I feel like I could reach out to her too. And, you know, I reached out to the former superintendent, Anthony DiCarlo, and he was very gracious and connected me with building principles regarding a food waste program that I was promoting. So, you know, sometimes you get lucky with a superintendent, sometimes you don't. But, you know, I imagine if, you know, it's a cold call, so to speak, that I could imagine, like, yeah, showing up at the transportation director's office and just saying, hey, I'm, you know, from Sustainable Putnam, and you know, I'm in touch with, you know, an East school bus company. I've been working to develop information that I'd love to, you know, share with you, and I'm not selling you anything, you know, I'm a nonprofit, and, you know, see how receptive they are to that, and, you know, go from there.
Yeah, and I have to hop and actually give another presentation,
Sure.
but I think Joe is totally right. If you've got a warm lead into a school board member or a superintendent, it's worth that conversation. Again, like top-down support is really important. And part of, like, I would say probably 90% of my job is actually cold emailing school board members and superintendents and stuff. And you'd be surprised how often it works. And people are really willing to learn. And once they do learn, you can create some really good advocates. But I apologize that I've back-to-back bookings, but I just wanted to say thank you guys. And thank you for all of the tough questions. It helps, like, keep me on my toes. And Emily, thanks to you too. I'm really glad that you were able to join. So I appreciate it.
thank you both, Claire and Emily, and everybody else who joined in today. And let's just look at this as the start, right, of a ongoing conversation about this. I took some notes that I'll share with the rest of you. And if anybody wants to, put it in a Google Doc, if that works for people. If not, I could PDF it. And we'll go from there. But yeah, I know you need to go, Claire, so go ahead. And if anybody else wants to stay on.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
feel
All
free
right, bye
Thank
y'all.
you.
No, I'm
Thank
gonna
you so much.
stop recording now. Thank you, Emily. It was great to see you again.
You too. Thanks so much for organizing this. It was great.
Sure.
Well, yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.